Okay, so I'm going to be honest. I'm not 100% sure where to put this video on the channel because technically I'm going to be covering some sort of like sensitive topics in the sense that I'm going to be talking about some of my experiences in foster care and why I ended up there, which is never fun for people to hear. But a lot of people cry at me, which is not ever the intention. And then I'm also going to be talking about like, my experiences after being placed in an adoptive home and how that went very poorly. So, like, obviously, if any of those things are like upsetting to you, I don't want that to be, and this may be not the video for you. And that's okay. I understand. But for me, like, I would like it to be known that, like, I am okay now. I am in a good place. I have done many therapy. I have talked and written poems and done the songs, and I have done the letters to people I'm mad at, and I've had a lot of time. So this is more like a reflection of stuff that I've realized would have been super helpful for me, and would have made the transition a lot smoother. Because I think a lot of the issues that I experienced were like fundamental misunderstandings about what it is like to be a foster child and then to be adopted, and how all those experiences that led you to that place affect you, and why that might create more complex or confusing issues that you may not understand about your child, and they may not be able to communicate to you because they're like 8, you know? Okay, so one of the first big pieces of context that we need to understand is probably from the ages of like 5 to 8 at least. I don't actually have any memories prior to that. My bio mom was like not there, like at all. Like in her brain, physically, mentally, emotionally, she was just like a shell of a human being. Occasionally she would come out to yell at me and like beat me for things because she was very upset. I'm honestly not sure. As an adult, I kind of wonder if she was a drug user, but like I don't actually know. So one of the things that affected is that we had no form of structure in the house. I like vaguely knew of the concept of like brushing your teeth and stuff. And then we also had like no food. So at some point, my bio mom popped out 2 half siblings for me, and just kind of was like, yeah, these are yours now. You take care of them. I'm going to go sleep all day and never talk to you. And if I do talk to you, it will be to yell at you and throw things. So anyways, I had 2 younger siblings that were like a toddler and infant age. And I was like 6 and 7 or 7 and 8. So I was like trying to problem solve feeding babies all by myself, because we used to have formula. You know, there was like a time somewhere in there where like we had the thing of formula, and then I think at some point she just like ran out of money or support, because there was like a couple of weeks there at the end before we ended up in foster care where like it felt like months. It might have only been a couple weeks, where like we didn't have baby formula. So my baby sister was like crying all the time, and I was like trying to shut her up because my mom would come out and scream at us and hit us. So I was like, shh, shut the fuck up. You are a baby. You need to be quiet. And I didn't have anything to feed her, and I knew she was hungry. So I was like filling little baby bottles with like water, and I would like trick her into thinking she had eaten today. Which, like, if you haven't experienced never knowing when your next meal is gonna be, it's hard to explain like how deeply that affects you on a psychological level, which is why I would like to try to do that. Because what happened is we went from like no structure, where my siblings would just like go wherever, and we had no clean clothes ever, and we would just like sleep in piles of laundry, to our first foster care placement, which like was fine. Honestly, they were like a nice enough weird granola family. They were like a weird granola Christian family, and that might have not been like in some ways the best choice, because like their specialty was like really difficult to socialize foster children, like kids who had like crazy amounts of issues and just needed like the first taste of stability. And that's what we were. We came with a lot of things like a lot of weird behaviors that take a while to unlearn before you can properly be socialized with other human beings. Because it was like the wild, like the story of like Mowgli in the jungle with the wild that was basically it. But there was no like Bagheera to check on us and be like, oh, hey, you could not be a dick. Okay, so the first family, they were nice enough. They were kind of weird. They had a lot of like communal stuff going on. which I did not love because I was very territorial with my siblings, with my stuff that was very little. I had like a backpack of school markers when I came to them. The social workers were like, oh, grab some things. We're going to go to a place for you. And I packed a backpack with like the school supplies I never got to use because I never got to go to preschool. No, it was like grade 2 or something. I just never got to go. So I was like, okay, I'll just bring my school supplies, I guess. So we get there, and this family, like, they made very healthy food for their family, which is great. But I, like, wouldn't eat lots of it. And I felt like a really bad kid, you know, because I went from, like, not eating food to, like, wow, these people feed me, like, 3 times a day. This is so cool. But then there was, like, food that, like, I physically, like, couldn't eat. Like I have a distinct memory of them, like one of the first things they ever fed us was this like pasta that had like a green sauce made from pureed broccoli. And at the time I was like, why are you being such a difficult fucking child? Just eat the fucking food that the nice foster people are give to you because you are hungry. And then I would try to put it in my mouth and my throat would be like, we're not doing that. The same thing with fucking homemade oatmeal. I still can't eat that shit. It just it like triggers something deep in my throat that like makes me go like, this is already vomit. Do not put this in your throat or it will become more vomit in the future. So yeah, I had like a horrible aversion to like a lot of the foods that they had there because they were all like crazy healthy. And now that I'm adult, I'm realizing it's probably because the only food I ate for like years was like prepackaged weird shit I found in the cupboard. You know, like if you're used to like drinking a bottle of ranch dressing or like eating a package of corn twists over the course of a week with 2 other people, you know, like you think like, oh, you have a pretty good tolerance for eating lots of different gross, weird things. That is not true, okay? Now that I think about it, I'd probably seen like a handful of vegetables in my entire life. So going into a new environment with new people who were making all kinds of weird, healthy food that is technically nutritious for a child, but would all be unfamiliar to me was not great. And one of the things they tried to do was they'd be like, well, you didn't eat your oatmeal for breakfast, so we're going to keep it until you eat it. And I realized that if I just didn't eat it long enough, they would have to throw it out because it would go moldy. So I'd just not fucking eat for like a while, and then they'd have to throw it out and give me something else. Which like that might sound bad if you have not had this experience, but for me, like I had grown up not eating for long stretches of time, so I was like, I'll just not eat. I know I won't die, probably. I haven't yet. So there was already issues with like eating healthy food because I had no exposure to it, and then the negative reinforcement of like it's a thing you have to eat just made me not want to do it more. You know, it just like activated defiance deep in my core of like, you're not my mom. I don't have to listen to you. My own mom doesn't mom me. I'm in charge of me. I'd have been like 8 or 9 at the time, maybe a little bit older. Then I went into a different foster home, which was okay. You know, it was fine for the most part. They had like normal food. I adjusted to it. There wasn't like terribly negative things I remember about that house. But I did have a lot of problems when I would go to respite homes, where essentially what would happen was, so a respite home is like when the foster parents are tired of you, not in like a they hate you way, but in like they're like, wow, this child is a lot of work like all the time. We just need a break from you, you know, just like a weekend for the parents. So sometimes they would put me in a respite home by myself, which was like kind of nice, because I hadn't had a lot of experience being without my siblings, and I had a lot of like attachment issues of like constantly needing to know where they were and how they were doing, and if people were being mean to them. I'd get very protective if any of my foster parents tried to discipline my siblings, because I was like, are you gonna hit them? And I would like watch them, you know, like a hawk. I'd be like I was like very invested in how my siblings were being treated and whether those people were good to them. So yeah, respite was like okay in the sense that like I got to spend time by myself, and like sometimes there were other people that were like my age or slightly older, which I wasn't used to, and I'd be like, oh, you're also foster child, that's so cool. But yeah, one of the main issues was that like I would steal food from the respite workers, And this is something that I've realized now is like not a normal thing that other people's brains do. And I suspect a lot of it was like survival stuff that my brain learned. Because like I still have it where like my brain will notice something like very high calorie and probably bad for you, like junk food, and it will like lock that memory in. It'll be like, this is where this thing is. Like I will dream about where that thing is in the house, and it'll be like, that is the thing that you must eat. And I'm realizing that was probably because that's actually how we functioned when I was a small child. It's hard to explain what that experience was like, because like I have large chunks of memory that like weren't there even as a small child. Like my brain would just block out huge chunks of time. So like I'm not sure what my bio mom did all day, or like where she went, or how she acquired food for us. Food would just like appear like magic, you know? Like we'd be like super hungry and have nothing for like a really long time, and then suddenly there'd be like a bag of chips in the pantry or something. Or I'd be like, oh, there's a granola bar in here. Maybe that was always in there and I didn't know. So I learned very early to like lock onto where the sources of food were and take advantage of that immediately before it disappeared, because I didn't know where food came from. I didn't know how we acquired it. I just knew sometimes it wasn't there. So yeah, I would go into like these like fugue states where I would like wander down to the pantry when it was like super dark and no one was awake, and I would like scoop peanut butter out of the jar. It was like really weird because it was a behavior that continued after I was adopted, and my adoptive parents could not understand it. You know, I would be like crying my eyes out because I'd eaten like a thing of Halloween candy, and they'd be like, we just don't fucking understand why you keep doing this shit. You know, we just don't understand why you choose to be this way and choose to be so, like, terrible to us when we give you all the things. We feed you 3 times a day. And I was like, I don't fucking know. It's like there's a demon that possesses my body, and then I end up over the, like, ice cream freezer thing, and I'm, like, eating weird shit. Fun fact, I learned now also that, like, probably some of that was because my adopted parents did not feed us enough. Yeah, so I went into this adopted family home, and they were expecting me to have normal food behaviors, but they were like crazy strict people. So my adopted parents, okay, they had like, these are the specific meal times. If you don't eat at the meal time, you don't eat at all. If you're hungry, you can have milk or a fruit. And again, I still have an aversion to fruits and vegetables because I just didn't grow up with them, and I'm very suspicious of them for lots of reasons. I'm always like, oh, this is bad. I hate this. It's taken me a long time to be cool with fruits, you know? And I feel like that's not a thing most people go through. So, yeah, like, the only options we had for, like, stuff to eat outside of meal hours was stuff that I just couldn't eat. And, like, milk, I love milk. It's great for me. Not a food. Does not replace food. I will tell you that immediately, okay? You just end up drinking enough milk that your parents get mad at you and tell you to stop costing them so much money by drinking milk. Even though their meals are like, yeah, you can have a bowl of cereal for breakfast. Lunch is going to be a sandwich, an orange, and a tiny thing of cucumbers that you're also not going to eat because you won't eat vegetables. So you're just going to throw everything out except the sandwich because your brain refuses to eat it for reasons unknown to you at the time. So you've had a bowl of cereal, a sandwich today. You might get 2 cookies with a glass of tea. And then maybe a bowl of pasta. But we don't want you to be fat because you're a gross fat child. That was my experience with my adoptive parents. I hope that's not normal, because I feel like that shouldn't be normal. But it all really clicked for me, like all the food things. And I was like, oh, that's why I did all that weird shit. When I was watching this lady who does like foster care advice for other foster parents, and one of the things she suggested was incredible. She was like, oh, so this is my snack cart that I have for the children. It has all the snacks in it. They kind of get like the ability to free range, and, you know, like we remind them to like wait a little bit in between eating things. But the whole concept is like most foster children experience food insecurity of not knowing when their next meal is going to be. So if you teach them that there is always going to be food available to them when they need it, they will be able to begin to learn the body signals that tell them whether they are hungry or full and how much they should eat, and eventually obsessing over the snack foods and stuff will not be such a big deal. And my brain was like, holy shit, that's what I needed. Because, yeah, as soon as I got out of my adopted parents' house and was in charge of managing my own food in college, my binge eating issues and my stealing food issues and my constantly being crazy hungry, alternating between being like eating one thing a day to like eating an entire thing of like chips or whatever, like out of nowhere, vanished like completely. You know, as soon as I had like, oh, I can get food whenever I need the food, my body stopped being like, we need to eat all the food now because we will never see it again. So yeah, like if you have foster children, adopted children, children in general that have experienced not eating food for long stretches of time, or like didn't have like a secure routine around food always being available, that might be a good idea, you know, like a little bit free range, you know, you don't have to be like, oh, eat whatever shit you want whenever, but like less strict than my parents, because like there were points where like I was genuinely very hungry as a high schooler, but I didn't know how to tell the difference between stress eating and eating because I was very hungry. So I'd be like crazy hungry, and I'd be like stealing like 3 fries out of a freezer bag because I realized really early that because my parents would be like, oh, we count everything and we label all the stuff so you can't take any of the foods. So I just like would steal like weird bits of random things in the freezer and microwave them, which sometimes went poorly and like started fires and shit. Or my mom would make these like loaves of bread, you know, like my adopted mom, and they were like really good. But we weren't really allowed to have them except for the explicit meal times, and that was generally only weekends. So I was like, oh, these are whole loaves of bread. If I do like the tiniest sliver of bread, I can eat that. Or I like, oh my God, there was this time where there wasn't really anything in the pantry, because like sometimes I would like steal the raisins from there. She had these like nasty like sugar ginger thing, like candied ginger things for some kind of baking. I'd never seen her use them. And I started eating those. They were terrible every time. I hated them, but I was so hungry. I was like, I guess this is what we're doing today. Because yeah, in the first foster family, it was like I refused to eat because everything was weird and gross. And then with my adopted family, it was like there was never enough food, so I would just like eat weird shit that you probably shouldn't be eating, you know, like baking supplies or cups of flour. I don't recommend that. Don't eat the flour. It's gross. So yeah, like a little bit of free range, you know. I feel like if I had been given more agency over food and like being able to say like, hey, I'm actually hungry, could we eat more food, without being reminded all the time that I was fat and gross and that they hated me, that would have been awesome, you know. Like I probably would have had way less issues. I was also like pretty skinny all through high school because I was working like crazy, burning all the calories and barely eating anything. Do not recommend that for your children, even if you want them to be attractive children. It sucks. I had so many issues with like passing out all the time, and my parents would be like, oh, you're just due for attention. So yeah, don't do what my parents did. Feed your children consistently and have some like free range options, you know. Like it doesn't have to be junk food, but it could be like something that they would eat, you know. If I had like my own thing of raisins, I would eat that. Now, the next thing I would like to talk about, keep in mind these aren't really in a specific order, is boundaries and understanding attachment. So, like I said, my bio mom, not a nice lady, okay? She would, like, come up with new creative ways to punish me in, like, really weird shit ways, like, oh, you're gonna eat soap because I think it would be funny. So I didn't have, like a nurturing mom figure to attach to. Like, the social workers were a little bit weirded out about it. They'd take us to our visits, and they'd be like, yeah, the children show, like, no attachment to their mom. And I, as an adult, can be like, yeah, that was because we spent no time with her. She was basically a stranger that lived there and was very mean. So I didn't have like a mom figure that I trusted. The only like adults that were nice to me were abusing me. So those weren't great examples. And then like in foster families, I don't know if it's a rule or not, but like every foster family I was at, it was only for like 2 years, you know? There's like a limit to how long you can be at a foster home, I think. Because that's like roughly how long it was each time. And that's like just enough to get attached to a family and be like, wow, I could maybe live here forever. And then for them to rip it away from you and be like, ha ha ha. No, your foster family doesn't actually want you anymore. So you're going to go to these new people who may or may not want you and may or may not be better or worse than whoever you were with last time. So yeah. So yeah, constantly having like adult figures introduced and then removed, you learn very quickly adults are unreliable. I will take care of myself and my siblings because everyone else sucks. So yeah, then I went into my adopted home, and they were very sneaky. Okay, my adopted parents, technically they like placed the foster kids with the adopted parents for like a year or two, and there's like a lot of paperwork that has to be done. So you're not officially adopted for like at least a year or two, or that was what it was in our case, right? The adoption order was not signed yet. My adopted parents, they were so sweet and loving and nice, and they let me paint my own room, and I had like my own space, and they let us have like all kinds of food that I was like, wow, this is amazing. They're nice cooks. They're nice to my siblings. This is all great. They seem like very loving, nice people. I don't know if they are parents for me, but they could be for my siblings because they're young enough. You know, even when I was like 13, I had an awareness, or I guess like a hope that my siblings were young enough that if they were introduced into a healthy placement soon enough, they wouldn't remember or have to deal with any of the trauma things, and they would just be like healthy adults, you know? So before the adoption order went through, everything was great. They were amazing. They were so nice. They did all the things that like you would expect nice, loving adoptive parents to do. As soon as the fucking adoption order went through, the first portents were there, okay? So like immediately after the adoption order went through, they were like, you need to call us some form of mom and dad. And at that point, like I had been thinking to myself, oh, I would maybe like to call them mom and dad one day. They seem like nice people. I'm happy here. We have a dog too. And that immediately for me, that was like the hard like defiance wall went up, and I was like, no, I'm gonna fucking never call you mom and dad. So I, for a while, went with male and female parental unit, and they got really fucking pissed about it. And they were like, no, it has to be some form of mom and dad only. So then I settled on mother and father. And they continued to suddenly become very strict and mean. So it was probably a good choice that I didn't get crazy attached to calling them mom and dad, because mother and father suits them very well. So yeah, we went from like, oh, we're so loving and supportive and we just want the best for you, to like... At some point they were like, yeah, you're not like really attached to the mural you painted in your bedroom that we let you do, because like it's kind of crap. And I was like, oh yeah, Dad, fine, I guess I'm old enough to like not care about painting my own room. We can just paint it a normal color. And that happened, like it was very insidious, you know. It started as like, oh, you don't really think that was like good, do you? And then it became like, yeah, no, actually you're just like a trash human being. And you disappoint us every day, and you're incredibly difficult. So, you know, like if you are a prospective adoptive, I'm going to assume you're not pure evil. You know, I'm assuming you're not like adopting children because you have no emotional control over yourself and you're trying to take out all your abusive energies on small, helpless beings. You know, I assume most people want to adopt children because they're nice people. So... My main piece of advice here is to understand that like boundaries and stuff take time. If you've been through a situation where every adult in your life has been unreliable and you're constantly being essentially abandoned emotionally by like everybody, you know, it's gonna take some time for you to warm up to like, oh, this is my mom and dad, because you've had several instances of like, oh, this person could be my mom and dad, and then they're like, fuck no, go to that other house, we don't want you. So yeah, like, and also, like, don't assume you know the emotions in your adopted child's heart or brain, okay? Like, I had been like, oh, I like these people. I might even love these people. But they assumed so much that because I was not attaching in the way that they expected, that there was something wrong with me. Like, I had a complex in high school that I might be like a sociopath or a narcissist, because my adopted dad, he would constantly like psychoanalyze me and mention all the ways that like I didn't make eye contact and I didn't interact with people properly and I was too arrogant and I never wanted to listen to what they said. Which is like normal teenage stuff also. Like, I don't even think that was like a trauma thing. That might have just been like because I was also much older than my siblings, because I got adopted when I was like 13. So yeah, don't assume that your kid doesn't love you or won't love you or hate you because they're more difficult than what you were expecting, or because they don't show the outward signs of being affectionate and emotional. If you are used to having an attachment that you've built taken away from you consistently enough, There were only a few responses to that, and one of the ones that I had was, I'm just gonna pretend, that like I don't love or care about you. I still do it. Honestly, all my friends say I'm a tsundere. because I'll be like weirdly, because I'll be like, oh, I don't care about this thing, I'm very cold about it, but inside my heart I'm a squishy baby. So yeah, just because someone doesn't outwardly show the signs of like being a super affectionate child, it's not because they hate you or it not working out. Like, oh my god, the amount of adoptive parent forums I see where they're like, oh, my child is a demon and they hate me because they don't hug me all the time and give me kisses. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably because like most foster children experience all kinds of like weird abuse masquerading as love. So that will take some time, it's not like a right away thing. And I get for you that's gonna be hard, but you chose this. So yeah, all adoption from foster care is born from trauma. Okay, your child went through like a bajubian crazy shitty things, for the government to be like, yeah, actually these parents are so bad, we have to remove them from the home, because this is like above and beyond acceptable for parenting. So yeah, so if you have child, remember that, okay? Boundaries, attachment, they take time. It not, maybe you're doing the good things and like you just don't know, okay? You could ask, but like they might also be scared to tell you how they feel just in case you make fun of them or are mean to them, because I've also had that happen where I would share my feelings about loving or caring about people in my family to be made fun of, and that hurt my feelings because I was very small. Okay, so the next thing that I would like to talk about is milestone development. Okay, so in foster care, children are generally still in like survival mode. Like they're trying to figure out which adults are gonna hit or scream at them, and which ones are gonna be like super creepy. And like for me especially, like my entire being was focused around my siblings. Like that I really think I took all the like trauma in my body and I like remolded it into like obsessive mothering. Like to the point where even when I got into public school, I would like stalk my siblings around the playground to like make sure nobody was being mean to them. Like I would I didn't make friends on purpose so that I could like just watch my siblings and make sure they were okay. So yeah, the reason I'm bringing this up is in foster care, it was all survival. It was all like, give the child some form of math book, and hopefully they will do some of it. Because again, I had no form of structure in my developmental years, and then in foster care, they were like, well, shit, these children are old enough to go to school, but we don't fucking know where to place them. 2 of them can't even talk. So my foster parents were like, oh, Selena can read and write. That's awesome. That's more than we were expecting. So they were like, here's a bajubian books. Read whatever you want. So I would spend like hours reading books. And a lot of them were probably not age appropriate for me because I was a very fast reader and no one had time to check through all the books. Like every adult in my life that was like trying to be responsible, they'd be like, oh, run these books by me before you read them. But then it got overwhelming and they'd be like, well, shit. I don't know. There's like 10 books there. They're probably fine for children. But the downside was like people were like, oh, Selena's so smart. She's going to be fine in school. She's probably just like not paying attention terribly, And the one thing I found was that I fucking hated math with all my being. And I'm 100% sure this was because I had no education on math. Like the fact that I could read and write was because I had like a cursive workbook, and I had been taught how to read as like a very, very small child, and I was the only one of the 3 of us that was. So I could read and write, and that skill was like above grade level for where I should have been. Everything else that required like milestones to develop, I did not have it. I just didn't. So my foster parents were like, yeah, I don't understand why Selena doesn't like math. Like she's so smart. She should just be able to do it. I don't understand why she's being so difficult. And this continued even into when I got adopted, where my adopted parents were trying really, really hard to put me in the grade level that would be appropriate for my age, which was good on their part. Okay, I will give them that. They did put the effort so I could skip a grade because I was very bored in school for like all the like conversation stuff. But like they didn't fully understand how not really ever going to school would affect understanding how school works. So like when they were trying to get me to like skip up a grade, they were like, why the fuck can't you figure out multiplication? This is super simple. Because at some point, whatever math class I had been in, they were like, yeah, so we're doing multiplication and like Selena's doing the tests and stuff, but like she's just adding everything together really fast. So like there was a long stretch of time where no one realized I couldn't do multiplication and I hadn't memorized the multiplication tables because I didn't know how. So I would just like, I understood the concept, so I just add everything together and subtract everything really, really fast. I don't recommend it. And, there were like a lot of issues that came out of them trying to bump me up to the next grade because math was such a struggle. So first of all, I was like a great participator in class. I loved going to school. School was my happy place. I would like get into the classroom and I'd be all excited and I'd tell the teacher all the things that I'd read into Jubian books. And I'd be like, oh, this is related to this thing and this is this thing and this is so cool. And like in concept, I could understand what the teacher was explaining about math or whatever. And I'd be very excited about it. But when it came to actually like sitting down and doing the workbook, I didn't fucking understand anything that was happening. I didn't even realize that you were supposed to be doing homework for like months, okay? Like the first years after I got into public school, like real public school, I like didn't hand anything in. They'd be like, oh, today is the day that homework assignment number 3 is in. So everybody bring your workbooks up and we'll mark them together. And I would have done absolutely nothing. And part of this I realized is because of the memory issues. So one of the consistent things that I found is that like PTSD, especially complex PTSD, you have a lot of memory issues. There are huge chunks of time and space that like my brain doesn't know about, right? I'll have like entire conversations with friends and my brain will just like, never happened. I don't remember any of that. Like somebody gave me a calendar for Christmas this year and it had all these different things that happened during the year in each time. So there was like, oh, we went to this thing for New Year's. And I was like, holy shit, all those things did happen. Cause yeah, like my brain, it like hard wipes huge chunks of information. The only things that it remembers very clearly are either very traumatic, are something I'm currently obsessed with, or happen to involve people that I have like big, stupid feelings about, So yeah, I had like a terrible memory. So I had no way to like keep the stuff in my brain unless it was stuff I either really, really liked, or was like really excited about. So math, fucked. Science and English though, I did pretty good at those. Those were good. But yeah, so the thing is, when it came to learning the math, my parents were like, why the fuck can't you do this? You literally just memorize the thing. And my brain couldn't. My brain was just like, we don't need this information. So you're going to sit here and you're going to cry for hours at the dinner table and it's going to be 2 a.m. And your parents are going to be yelling at you because you are stupid. That's the only explanation. There's no other explanation for why you can't have the memory to do these things. You're just a stupid, dumb baby. And this actually, it went into other things too. As I got later into school, I still had trouble like agendas and stuff. I understood that like when the teacher said, write this down, we put it in the agenda. But I didn't really understand the function of an agenda. Like I'd write the stuff down and I'd immediately forget about it. I'd be like, yeah, I don't know. Or like I wouldn't know what it meant. They'd be like, oh, the agenda note on the board would be like, read chapter 3. And then I'd get home and I'd be like, chapter 3 of what? Like I did not have any exposure to routine at all. So even just like, oh, obviously children would know to like look at the board even if I don't mention it, because these are all a bunch of like 14-year-olds. A 14-year-old obviously would know that if something is written on the board, they should write it down. I did not know that. Obviously a 14-year-old would know that during homework time, these things are stuff that we talked about in class, so they should do that unit in the book. Unless I was explicitly told, do this section, I'd be like, yeah, I don't know, they're just tell me information. That's how school works in every other class. I'd show up to test and I'd be all excited because I'd be like, yeah, I learned some things. And then I'd have no fucking clue what's going on. Yeah, so like I fundamentally did not understand the structure of school or how that worked. That sucked. And I feel like it actually connects to a bigger issue, which is that my adoptive parents did not understand how severely the way that I grew up it affected me developmentally. Because there were huge chunks of like basic learning building blocks that I did not have. To this day, I still need to count on my fingers when I'm like doing change and stuff. And I'm really kind of still ashamed and embarrassed about it. Like it actually fills me with shame. Like my coworkers have all been very nice about it, and they'll like tease you a little bit and they'll be like, oh no, it's whatever. But like I feel shame, like I did -1 math and I passed all those things. If you give me a calculator and like 15-30 minutes, I can do math. I can do like real math, like adult people math. But if you fucking want me to like add and subtract shit on the fly, I'll just sit there and I'll be like, what? And like everyone can tell it's terrible, like I feel so much shame. Because that building block was never there for me. No one sat down and was like, oh, today we're going to play a game where we're going to count to 120 and we're going to, oh, look at all these apples in the thing. How many apples are there? No one did that shit with me. It was like, children are there to be seen and not heard. Shut the fuck up. Nobody wants to hear from you. So I didn't learn any of that. So when I got adopted, because I was like considered like a very mature, smart child, my adopted parents just assumed I would know stuff, like they would try to teach me something in the kitchen and they'd be like so pissed and frustrated because they'd be like, why the fuck can't you get this? This is so easy. You're just chopping carrots and you can't do it right. And I would just be like, fine then, I'll never do it again. And they'd be like, good, because the kitchen is your mother's space and you're not supposed to be in here. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. I'll never help with anything to do in the kitchen ever again. And it really discouraged me from learning lots of life skills, because if I couldn't do it right away, they would get really mad at me because I wasn't small. Like with my sister, who was very, very small, they were very patient. They would sit and they would like do the mixing bowl shit with her, and they were very nice to her. But because I was older, they were like, oh, you obviously just can't do it because you're stupid. Not because I had never had someone at the age of like 5 be like, oh, Selena, would you like to play pretend in the kitchen? I didn't have that, okay? There was nobody to be like, oh, today we're going to be mimicking life skills during playtime, because I didn't go to fucking school where they do that stuff with you. So yeah, there are like huge swaths of skills where my parents would be like, why the fuck don't you know how to do this? Why are you being so difficult? This is super easy. And it's because, yeah, most children, like as like little people, they like play act that activity. And then they start like gradually being introduced to these new skills. But I am like a mentally 14-year-old who had none of that development. So I have the added shame of not knowing how to do it already, because I am smart enough to understand the concept of mixing something in a bowl. So it both hurts my pride and my self-esteem. And I also just like don't have the built up coordination and skill and development, because that didn't have it. Just didn't happen for me. So yeah, I would say, if you adopt a child, please do not assume that they're trying to be difficult when something is hard for them, especially if they're like crying, okay? Like I would sit at the table and I would cry for like hours, and my parents would be like, stop trying to make us feel guilty. I was crying because I was upset at myself for being stupid. Yeah, don't assume that they're going to know stuff. Your child may come to you and they might be developed like verbally. They might not. You don't know. But even if they seem like fairly adjusted, there are gonna be blind spots where the foster parents couldn't fill those gaps for them. There's gonna be things that they don't know or haven't had experience with. And that's a part of it, okay? You're not gonna get a foster kid who's like perfectly adjusted. They've already been like fully realized as people. They still have a lot of stuff to learn with the added stress of already having been put into the role of basically being their own mini adult. So yeah, it's like all the shame of being an adult that doesn't know how to do stuff, but you're actually still a kid and no one taught you anything. So that sucks, and you most of the time you don't even realize why it's hard for you, because you're just day to day trying to get by. And speaking of not having experience or being blindsided by things, this section I will be talking about racism. So for context, I am a transracial adoptee, which means that I am a very non-white person who was adopted into a family of white people. And I don't personally think that's bad. There's a lot of debates over how ethical that is. I don't really think it an ethical issue necessarily. I just had a terrible experience personally. So first of all, I would say I experienced racism fairly early, and I just didn't realize it because I didn't have the vocabulary, the awareness for it. My bio mom, she married into a family that very much did not like me or my mother because we were Filipino. And that manifested in a lot of ways that I can only like half remember because I was very small. But I remember distinctively one conversation about it being because we were brown and that they thought we were dirty. So like I internalized that, and I was always very jealous of my half siblings because they could pass for white, Like my one sister, she's very pretty, she's very blonde, she's like a typical beautiful white girl. And my brother, like he's got dark hair, dark eyes like me, so he doesn't quite pass, but like he can, And I was always super jealous of that, and I didn't really have the words to express why I felt that way. I just had like this sort of feeling that my siblings were better than me. And yeah, I realized a lot of it came from very early on experiencing being treated differently because of racism. And that also manifests in ways that I think adoptive parents might not fully realize when taking in children. So with my adopted family specifically, all the time my parents would make jokes about how other people probably thought I was the nanny. And it was like very upsetting to me internally, but because they were joking about it, I felt like I couldn't be upset, So even though no one had ever said these things directly to me, they put it in my head that I was obviously different from the rest of the family, and my parents are also the kind of people that will be like, oh, we don't see race, we're colorblind, which is bullshit, okay? I feel like if you are adopting children and they are a different ethnicity than you, like very visually obviously, I feel like you can't be colorblind because your kid is not going to be colorblind. I would go to school and like other people that were Filipino or Latina, because I'm some kind of weird mix of both of those, they'd be like trying to talk to me in, is it Tagalog? Or they'd be asking me about my family and stuff, and I'd be like, I have no fucking clue what's going on. Why are these people do this to me? And then I realized, oh shit, it's because they think I'm like a real Filipino. And that's another thing is, I don't know the non-offensive term for this. I realized very early on that I felt very much like an Oreo, like I was brown on the outside, but I was entirely raised by white middle-class families, so that was the only experience I had of the world. I had never really met anyone that looked like me until I went to school, and then when I met those people, I had nothing in common with them. I didn't understand what they were telling me all the time. I didn't understand the things they talked about culturally. And it was like really uncomfortable for me. And yeah, my adoptive parents did not help with that, because when we first got adopted, there was kind of like a big to do where they were like, oh, do you want to experience cultural heritage things? And at the time, again, internalized racism, I was like, I don't fucking want anything to do with Filipino culture, because in my mind, I associated that with my bio mom, because the only Filipino people I'd had exposure to was my bio mom, who was a trash bag, and I was vaguely aware that her whole situation came to be because her family was also a bunch of trash bags. So my thought was like, I'm not attached to my mom, so I have no right to any form of culture like that, obviously. I'll just not have one. Um, and I think part of this is because my parents were like, we'll just let you lead the way on that, which is a terrible choice. Because even at a young age, I was like, yeah, I don't feel like I have a right to this culture, and you are both very, very white people. So I feel like even if you did try to teach me culturally, you would teach me wrong. And I would say that was accurate, okay? So when I was like 17, my parents got it in their head that they wanted to throw me a quinceañera. And at the time, I was dealing with a lot of gender dysphoria. So I didn't want any fucking thing to do with some sort of ceremony that had to do with becoming a woman. I didn't even particularly like being a woman. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't even really feel like I am one. I didn't say that though, because I instinctively knew they were not going to get it. So instead I was like, also a quinceañera is for when you're 16. Like I had only like a minimal exposure to what a quinceañera was because of Wizards of Waverly Place. And I had to educate my adult parents on why it would be inappropriate to throw a quinceañera for a 17-year-old without understanding fundamentally any of the traditions or what the quinceañera is about or why you do it, and also not having any friends or family that I would want to invite. So I would say there's a little bit of a balancing act there of like, I don't know if I would say that I wanted to like learn about being a Filipino, because I just never was a thing for me, you know? But like I also don't think it was fair to like put me in charge of my own heritage education. You know, like that wasn't terribly helpful, because I was like 13, 14 when the subject first came up, and I didn't fucking know. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I just would like to be fed frequently and go to school and maybe like go to college one day. I don't really have the mental space or energy to think about my identity all that much. So like really what I connected with most was when I would go visit our extended family and I would learn about Dutch stuff. You know, so like I identified mostly as being Dutch, even though I was biologically not Dutch at all. But like I just knew that I was different from the rest of my family, and everybody else knew it too. Anytime we'd meet new people, they would like give like that weird look of like, these are your children? Yeah, like all the time. And the constant like, oh haha, did we people must have thought you were the maid. You know, it made me feel really shitty that my siblings could go out in public with my family and nobody would say anything. But if I went with my family, it was so obvious that I just didn't belong there. Even like, so my mom was like obsessed with crafts. Okay, there was like a lot of crafting happening in the adopted household, and we would each have like a station. It wasn't like fun crafts. It was like, you have a task, you have a task, you have a task, and then we put all the tasks together to mass produce 38 Christmas cards. And they would always joke about how they had their own Filipino sweatshop, and because it was a joke, I couldn't say anything, but like I felt very uncomfortable with the concept, because like all the stereotypes that were related to me looking different had to do with like being a maid or being a sweatshop worker or being a nanny, you know? So it really made me feel like the only way people would ever see me was as some kind of like a servant role, because that's how my parents treated us and talked to us and joked about it, you know? Yeah, I just felt very othered in my family, and I think it probably would have made me feel a lot better if they had been more sensitive to that and realized that maybe they were making me feel like I wasn't a part of the family. Because yeah, there were so many things like that where it was like little stuff that would just kind of build up, and I just had like a very instinctive feeling that like I just didn't belong, you know? Like even when they were being complimentary, like my dad would be like, oh, you have like beautiful exotic eyes and shit, and that's not really what you want to hear from a father figure. You don't really want to hear from a father figure that you're like hot and stuff. That's weird. Okay, don't do that. I highly don't recommend that, especially if you adopted a kid that has a history of sexual abuse, because those things are going to trigger a lot of weird shit that you don't want to associate yourself with if you're trying to be like a normal parent figure. So, yeah, I would have just appreciated a little more sensitivity around the fact that I look different and maybe some like reinforcement that I was still a part of the family and just as valuable as my super blonde sibling, you know? Like that would have been nice. Yeah, I was so jealous that like the my other siblings looked like they could be related to my parents. It was like actually something that I resented them for a little bit. And I never really got to have that conversation. So yeah, don't make your kids lead the way heritage wise. If I don't know, like for some things it would be nice to learn specifically about the hair and the skincare for specific ethnicities. Like my parents gave me a lot of terrible advice about taking care of my skin, and they were just like bewildered why I kept getting blackheads, and they were like personally offended that I had acne and stuff. But that was because they were making me wash my face like crazy with like face wash that didn't do shit and was bad for my skin. I grew up very fundamentally Christian. So even though technically, okay, legally I am a bastard, that is like a real thing. I didn't appreciate my parents joking about how I must be the child of the mailman because, like, in my soul, you know, from like all the Bible stuff that I internalized, I was like, but that would make me like a bad person, you know, like, because bastards are bad. And there's like a whole thing about that, and like, it's like bad, and God doesn't like that. So I did not appreciate the thought that other people might think I was a bastard child. I just wanted to be a normal child that was part of the family. Yeah, so it already sucked enough that outside of the home, people would be like, "Oh, those are your parents? We thought your parents would look different." And then to go into the home and be constantly reminded that like you didn't belong there and you look different and you're always going to look different and everyone's always going to think that you're like a maid or something, because that's obviously your place in the world because you're brown. So we have basically covered all of the things. There's just like one last sort of important note that I would like to put is that I've mentioned a lot of things that have informed why the ways I behaved were different than what a normal child might have done, and things that affected me very differently, I think, than if I had been like biologically born into my adopted family. But I also want to like just emphasize the fact that this is meant to help inform how you interact with a kid who's been in foster care or that you're adopting, not so that you can sort of excuse everything as like their problem or their fault or something that's like something they need to fix about themselves, you know? A lot of these situations would have been helped with just like the barest semblance of kindness and understanding. That was really all I needed. I really wanted a family, you know? That was like the one thing I wanted more than anything else. Yeah, and part of that was, I think, a lot of the times when there were like very normal issues in the household, like me being not even really a rebellious teenager, it was like I would like to buy snacks with the money I make at my part-time job. And my parents would be like, "Oh, this is because of your trauma," and they'd be like, "You need to see a therapist," as like implying that like I was the problem. There was nothing they needed to fix, and everything was okay for them. And I was just being unusually difficult for a teenager because of trauma, which is not really fair. I think it's important to like assume that there could be lots of reasons, and even if your kid doesn't quite know how to like explain those feelings to you, you should still give them room to explain in their own words how they're feeling and why they're behaving the way they are when they have had space to like cool off. Also, please don't do shit that re-traumatizes your child, okay? And what I mean by that is recreating like incidents and things that like you know are in their file, okay? Like, so my adoptive parents, they received like a dossier, okay? It's like a huge thick file of everything that's ever happened to me that the social workers and the government know about, everything. And I was reading back through it and I was like, holy shit, my parents have done all these things to me. So like there's like full sections on like how we would be like beaten and stuff, and that I had a lot of like anxiety around my siblings being physically disciplined because we grew up in an abusive household. And one of the first punishments my parents instated, but only for my brother because he was bad at school, was they would spank him with like a spoon, and they spanked him so hard with the wooden spoon that it broke, and they replaced it with a plastic spoon so it couldn't break. And that was like a funny story they would tell people, and I remember being like extremely upset about it, and I would talk to them and be like, hey, I don't think this is necessary. I really think my brother needs more support in school. You're making him feel bad and you're not helping him, and then you're traumatizing him. And they would just like brush it off, because they'd be like, oh, you're just parentified, so that means you can't have any opinions about how we discipline the children. That's bad for your development. So just sit over there and I don't know, just pretend your brother isn't crying his little tiny eyes out because we're beating him. Because it's not the same. It's not the same as the abuse you experienced. And they would do that all the time. They would bring up like the abuse I had experienced as almost like a comparison to whatever was happening to make it seem less bad. Which, bringing up trauma is triggering, okay? Just like common sense. If someone has had like a traumatic incident happen to them, don't fucking bring that shit up and be like, oh, sorry, that probably is related to you getting fucking electrocuted by the CIA and having stuff shoved up your butt, you know? Like, there's a line to it of like, you don't want to actively be bringing up stuff unless it might be related to like an issue they're having, you know? Like if your kid came to you and they were like, hey, you know, I'm worried about this thing that I heard at school and it's making me feel bad about myself. Then you could be like, oh, well, these are things that we know, and you have an age-appropriate conversation. But if you are doing something bad, or you are doing something that could be upsetting to your child because you read in the file that this is a thing that upsets them, the solution is not to bring up their trauma and be like, oh, not the same, you're just traumatized, so you don't know any better. That is not the solution. That is never going to be a solution. Please don't fucking do that, okay? It's a poor choice. You're just going to like be compounding stuff that could have been worked through in like a healthy therapy environment. You are given a lot of information on the things that your children have been through, but not necessarily the way it affects them. My parents fundamentally misunderstood what parentified means. Parentified is not, you don't get to have any say in parenting decisions. Parentified is like, you were put in charge of being a parent and that wasn't healthy or okay for you. But my parents still did that, okay? I was pretty much entirely in charge of my siblings after we were adopted. Anytime they did anything wrong, I was punished for it. I was put in exactly the same role that I was in my entire childhood by these people, but they insisted it wasn't being parentified. So yeah, like actually learn what the terms and stuff mean, actually learn what some common effects of this trauma is like for people, especially further down the road, because it can crop up in a lot of ways that are hard to understand. Because like trauma, it is, I'm not going to say fixable. I would say it's manageable and work throughable with the right kind of support and encouragement and a good, healthy environment. And you can be all those things for an adopted child. I'm not saying that like people shouldn't adopt or that like it's fundamentally a broken system and that people should never do that. I just think that these are all things that it would have been super great if someone had actually taken the time to understand from my point of view, instead of assuming that like I was trying to be a bad kid or I was trying to not be a part of a family. Like even as an adult, I have extended family that assume that like I'm not in contact with my parents because I just like didn't want a family, which is fucked up. I have always wanted a family. It was like the most important thing to me. My siblings were my entire life. Like I had like a terrible suicidal ideation pretty much since I was like 6. And the only reason I never acted on it was because I wanted my siblings to have a healthy environment and to grow up in a healthy way. And I didn't believe that would be good for them developmentally. So yeah, just don't fucking assume that your kids are trying to be difficult. They are going through a lot of really big emotions that full-grown adults have a hard fucking time with. I'm still working through shit, and I'm like 24. Yeah, just be patient. I think if you have well intentions and you understand that foster children are not like dress-up dolls and things are not going to be perfect, it'll be a much easier time for everybody. And my last thing would be, just because you've read some parenting books and stuff does not mean you are an expert on your child's experience. There were so many times where I would be like directly telling my parents, hey, this is what I think I need. This is why I do these things. And they would just be like, yeah, well, we've read a bunch of parenting books and we took a bunch of courses before we could even adopt. So we know better than you, and they don't say to do those things. Which is stupid. Okay? If you really want your child to like develop well and understand things, you need to understand their personal experience, because it will be different. Not everyone is going to have the same experience as I had. Not everybody's going to have the same like trauma responses and survival mechanisms as I have. Because I am a different person than future children that people are going to have. But it's still important to be compassionate. And that was all the thoughts I had on the things. I hope you enjoyed and that it wasn't terribly depressing. I know this was a lot of lore about me personally. But again, I'm okay. Everything is okay. I've been worked through many issues. And I'm a lot more self-aware of the things and why I do the things. And that's good for me. Okay, bye.